This is Understanding U.S. Government. I'm your host, Mr. Giese. In this episode, we will be discussing the topic of suffrage and how the U.S. expanded the electorate over the years. So, how exactly have voting rights changed over the course of American history? And what are the qualifications for voting now? Let's try to answer those questions now. Before 1789, the electorate consisted of white, male property owners. There was even an issue of religious belief as well. So if you look at that demographic and who was able to vote, was this a good representation of the United States? If that were the case today, think of how many people would not be able to vote. Before 1789, the group of men that were able to vote was under 1 in every 15 adult white males. So even in that time, it was not a great representation of the population of the nation's white males. As you know, the electorate does not look like that now. So let's take a look at what changed throughout history. We can break up this extending suffrage into 5 stages. In the first stage, after 1789, efforts to eliminate the religious requirement from the colonial days started. This was the first requirement to go, and by 1810, that requirement was gone. The next requirement to go was the issue of property rights. Efforts started before the 1850s, but by that time period, it was gone as well. So at the end of stage 1, the electorate had expanded to all adult white males regardless of their religion or their ownership of property. Stage 2 would come as a direct result of the Civil War. As you should have learned in U.S. history classes, one of the issues during the Civil War was slavery. President Lincoln and his government sought out to eliminate this institution, and with the 15th Amendment expanded the electorate by prohibiting any restriction on voting based off of race or color. Southern governments would not take kindly to this legislation and implemented poll taxes, or a fee in order to cast your vote, and literacy tests, or tests to assess whether you could read or write. As these were not race-specific, they were allowed. However, the impact was directly aimed at African Americans that had limited job opportunities and no formal education after being freed from slavery. So while the government passed legislation to expand suffrage to African Americans, there were other actions that still disenfranchised African Americans. Stage 3 would come later on in history. And in 1920, the U.S. government passed the 19th Amendment. This prohibited any restriction on voting rights based on gender. That's right, up until 1920, women were not allowed to vote. That being said, in several states in the West, women were allowed to vote as early as 1869. Now the electorate had expanded to men and women of all colors and races with no religious or property ownership requirements. Stage 4 would attempt to deal with the restrictions on African American voters, like the poll taxes and literacy tests. To help enforce the 15th Amendment, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. The U.S. government went further with their efforts by passing the 24th Amendment. In this amendment, it eliminated the use of poll taxes. The requirement to pay a fee in order to vote had now been prohibited. In essence, Stage 4 came to be because of the need to enforce the efforts made in Stage 2. Stage 5 would come as a direct result of the Vietnam War. There was public outcry for those young men being drafted into the war, but not having any opportunity for participation in the government. And in response to this, the U.S. government passed the 16th Amendment, which dropped the minimum age to 18 years old. Now our electorate looks drastically different than those old white guys before 1789. Now, in order to vote in the United States, there are 3 requirements. First, you must be a citizen, either naturally born or naturalized citizen of the United States in order to vote. Second, you must be a resident in the state that you wish to vote in. The amount of time that you have to be a resident is determined in the state. For instance, in Missouri, it states for residents to be based on three things. You must be living in Missouri, you have to have the intention of staying, and if you leave, you must have an intent on returning to Missouri. The third requirement to vote in the U.S. is to be over the age of 18. So, as I stated before, the electorate expanded throughout American history due to societal pressures. These 5 stages show the progression of voting rights to those that did not fit the criteria before 1789.